Just minutes ago, Alaska authorities broke the silence that has haunted fans for years. The mystery surrounding one of television's most beloved survivalists has finally reached a moment of truth. After years of speculation, endless searches, and countless theories, officials have released a statement confirming what really happened to Marty Meierotto, the legendary trapper, the face of mountain men, and the man who vanished into the wild. Tonight, the Alaskan wind carries more than cold. It carries a story that's gripped the hearts of millions. It began as a whisper in the wilderness, a rumor that Marty had been found, or at least that someone finally knew where he was. Now, that whisper has become a roar. For the first time, authorities have put words to what so many feared, hoped, and wondered about for years. To understand the weight of this revelation, you have to remember who Marty was, or maybe who he still is. To those who watched him on the History Channel, Marty wasn't just another television personality. He was Alaska itself, raw, untamed, and fiercely alive. Week after week, he pulled viewers into a world of ice and isolation, where survival wasn't scripted. It was earned. Born with a wild heart, Marty never chased fame. The cameras didn't make him who he was. They just followed him long enough for the world to notice. He was a man who built his life out of snow and steel, who lived by instinct and patience, and who seemed more at home under the northern lights than under any roof. But even legends grow quiet. Toward the end of his time on Mountain Men, fans noticed a change. His voice softened, his words grew more thoughtful. His eyes carried that look, the look of a man already halfway back to the wilderness. In 2020, Marty announced he was leaving the show. He said he wanted to spend more time with his family and protect the peace he'd earned. Few imagined that peace would come at such a high cost. After that announcement, Marty disappeared completely. No interviews, no updates, not even a rumor worth believing. His silence became its own kind of sound, a haunting echo across Alaska's mountains. And with that silence came questions. Where was he? Was he okay? Had something gone terribly wrong? Then, years later, something strange happened. A small report from Fairbanks mentioned a cabin fire along the Yukon River. It was remote, deep in the same trapping grounds where Marty was known to roam. Locals whispered that it might have been his. The authorities didn't comment, but for those who'd followed his story, the timing was too close to ignore. As speculation grew, Alaska's Department of Public Safety quietly began an investigation. Search teams were dispatched without fanfare. For months, they combed frozen valleys and pine forests, following fragments of clues most people would have missed. There were snowshoe tracks, a burned shelter, a snowmobile half buried in ice, but no sign of the man himself. Then came the first real break, a set of charred tools engraved with the initials MM, found beside what was left of a log cabin. Nearby, investigators uncovered a journal, its edges blackened, but its writing still visible in parts. It was Marty's handwriting, careful and steady at first, then growing shaky toward the end. One line stood out above all the rest. "The storm is coming faster than I thought." That single sentence sent chills through the entire search team. Locals knew exactly what storm he meant. Around that same time, a blizzard had torn through the Yukon interior, so violent that even emergency transmitters went dark. They called it the White Silence. Entire tree lines vanished under snow. Temperatures plunged to deadly lows. In such conditions, even experienced trappers rarely survived. But this was Marty Meierotto. He wasn't like anyone else. Friends swore he could smell a storm before it formed, that he could navigate by wind alone. "If anyone could walk out of that kind of hell," one friend said, "it was Marty." Weeks passed. The official report stayed quiet. Then, just as winter gave way to spring, a fisherman made a discovery that reignited the case. A small leather pouch, frozen solid in the ice near the Tanana River. Inside were several gold nuggets, a faded family photo, and a folded piece of paper. Written in Marty's distinct handwriting were 5 simple words. "If you find this, I went north." Those words changed everything. North from where? Toward what? The terrain north of the Tanana was some of the harshest on Earth. Vast tundra stretching toward the Arctic Circle, a place where even satellites struggled to map terrain. Yet that was the direction the team followed. Using drones, trackers, and old maps Marty himself had drawn for the show, they pushed deeper into the mountains. It wasn't long before one of the drones captured a flicker of movement. A shelter made from spruce branches and tarp, perched beneath cliffs known as the Dead Teeth. The name wasn't poetic, it was a warning. The area was infamous for sudden drop-offs and strange magnetic fields that caused compasses to spin uselessly. When troopers reached the site, they found only ashes. Someone had been there, survived there, and moved on. Among the ashes lay a torn flannel jacket, one of the same kind Marty always wore. They also found makeshift traps, animal hides, and a tattered copy of the Alaska Trapper's Handbook. Whoever had built that camp had survived for weeks, maybe months, after the storm. Then came a break from an unexpected witness. A local pilot named Jim Bradford came forward, claiming he had seen a lone man waving a flare near the Dead Teeth during a flyover. At the time, he assumed it was another hunter, but now, after hearing the news, he was certain it was Marty. His testimony prompted a second expedition, this time larger, better equipped, and guided by two of Marty's closest friends. The conditions were brutal. The cold was the kind that burned, not froze. Snow-blinded visibility, winds howled like spirits, and yet the search team pressed on. Hours turned to days. Their only guides were instinct and fragments of Marty's old trails. And then, just when they were about to turn back, they found it, a small clearing marked by a crude shelter, half buried in snow. Inside was a metal tin, wrapped in wax paper. Inside the tin were notes. The entries read like survival logs, dates, weather conditions, temperature readings, and short reflections. For a while it was steady, food sources, shelter repairs, wind patterns. But near the end, the tone changed. The final note read, "Running low on fuel. Cabin destroyed. Still heading north, following the sun." That single line felt like both a farewell and a declaration. Even facing death, Marty was moving forward. The team followed the trail as far as they could, but heavy snow erased any trace of direction. Exhausted, they turned back, knowing they had reached the edge of what man and machine could endure. When the search report was released, the state called the case unresolved with indicators of extended survival. It was government phrasing that meant only one thing. There was evidence Marty lived longer than anyone expected. But beyond that, nothing could be proven. Online communities erupted with theories. Some said he had gone completely off-grid to live alone by choice. Others believed he perished, but left clues to inspire others. The idea that he was still alive somewhere, surviving quietly in the Arctic, became folklore. They called him the Ghost of the Yukon. Then, another strange development. During a routine flyover, thermal cameras picked up faint heat signatures deep in the northern foothills, far beyond the known search radius. The images showed a pattern. Small, isolated heat spots, appearing intermittently, almost rhythmic. Experts argued it could be nothing but natural gas vents or wildlife. But those who knew Marty disagreed. They said it looked exactly like how he'd move, fire to fire, shelter to shelter, one step ahead of the cold. The state refused to confirm or deny the theory. But to fans, hope was reborn. Interviews with Marty's old friends painted a portrait of a man who could thrive where others would freeze. "He's not the type to die out there," one said. "He's the type to disappear." Then, last winter, a bush pilot reported something that changed everything again. He saw a lone figure trudging across the tundra on snowshoes, pulling a small sled behind him. The man wore dark furs, moved with steady rhythm, and carried a staff, exactly as Marty used to on his trapping runs. The pilot tried to circle back, but winds forced him to retreat. Within hours, state troopers mobilized another team. When they reached the area the next morning, they found tracks, fresh snowshoe prints winding northward. The prints were spaced evenly, suggesting experience, patience, and endurance. Around them, the team found remains of a fire and cleaned bones of small game. Whoever was out there wasn't just surviving, they were living deliberately. For a moment, the wilderness seemed to whisper his name, but just as quickly, the weather turned. A whiteout forced the team to withdraw. Before they left, a search drone caught one last frame. A lone figure standing on a ridge, facing north. The figure didn't wave, didn't move, just stood against the endless horizon. The image was blurry, but unmistakably human. The clothing, the build, even the posture matched Marty. That photograph became iconic, a silhouette of a man against infinity. It fueled documentaries, debates, and dreams. Was he alive? Had he chosen this? Or was the wilderness keeping his secret? Months passed. Then came the most dramatic revelation of all. During a geological survey roughly 60 miles north of the Brooks Range, a research drone spotted a small rectangular structure partially buried in snow. Thin smoke rose from a vent pipe. Troopers were dispatched immediately. When they reached the cabin, they found it sturdy, handmade, built from spruce logs. Smoke still curled from the chimney. Inside, the air was warm. Animal pelts hung neatly, supplies were organized, and on a small wooden table sat a kettle above dying embers. And next to it, a note. It was written in Marty's familiar handwriting. The message was simple. Stop searching. I'm home. The handwriting was verified on site by experts. Every stroke, every curve was his. The tone was unmistakably his. Calm, final, and full of quiet certainty. But the strangest part? There were no footprints leading away from the cabin. Not a single one. It was as if he had simply vanished into the snow. When the news broke, it spread like wildfire across Alaska and beyond. Some said it was closure. Others said it was proof that he'd transcended the world that couldn't understand him. To his friends, it was neither mystery nor myth. It was Marty being Marty. If he said he's home, one friend said softly, then that's exactly what he meant. Authorities analyzed the note, ran DNA tests on trace skin cells from the paper, and cross-referenced it with samples taken from his old gear. Every test confirmed authenticity. It was his. Yet no one could explain where he'd gone after writing it. Then, just when the story seemed to settle, a new video surfaced. Footage taken 3 weeks ago by a geological team flying over the far north. In the grainy clip, a lone figure moves steadily through the snow, dragging a sled. The coat he wears, patched with fur and leather, is identical to the one Marty was last photographed wearing nearly a decade ago. At his belt, a glint of metal, the same handmade knife recovered years ago from the Tanana River. When coordinates were matched, the figure was traveling exactly where his last note pointed. North. Always north. The same direction he wrote about in his logs. The same direction that had guided his entire life. Officials tried to reach the area but were forced back by fierce winds. After reviewing the footage, they issued a statement unlike any other. For the first time in Alaskan history, a missing person case concluded with the words, unaccounted for, but presumed alive by choice. Those final 3 words stunned the nation. Alive by choice. It wasn't a death certificate. It was a declaration of freedom. It meant the man who'd taught the world how to live in the wild was still out there, choosing it again and again. Social media exploded instantly. Hashtags like #TheMountainManLives and #MartyNorth trended worldwide. Fans shared old clips, quotes, and heartfelt messages. And then came a voice that silenced everyone. Marty's wife, Dominique. In a rare public statement, she said, Marty's spirit was never meant to be confined by walls or cities. If he's chosen the wilderness, then that's where his peace is. Her words struck something deep. Because maybe that was the truth all along. Maybe he wasn't lost. Maybe he was found, just not by us. Since then, bush pilots have reported thin trails of smoke in valleys untouched by human hands. Hikers have found faint footprints that vanish as quickly as they appear. And sometimes, when the wind dies and the northern lights ripple across the sky, locals swear they can see a flicker of light, a lone fire burning far out on the tundra. Tonight, as the world finally understands his story, Marty Meierotto stands not as a mystery, but as a message. He showed that wilderness isn't just a place. It's a calling. And some callings can't be silenced, not by storms, not by time, not even by the world's need for answers. Somewhere in Alaska, beneath a sky alive with color and cold, a man walks quietly, dragging his sled through the snow. The crackle of his fire echoes faintly against the mountains. He looks to the north, just as he always did, and smiles. He's not gone. He's not lost. He's home. The legend of Marty Meierotto didn't end with that final note or even with the state's official declaration. In fact, that was just the beginning of something far greater, something that no authority, no broadcast, no government record could ever contain. As the winter sun returned to Alaska's frozen horizon, stories began to surface from bush pilots, trappers, and remote villagers scattered along the Brooks Range. One claimed he'd seen faint smoke curling above a ridge where no cabin should have been. Another swore he'd spotted snowshoe prints that appeared and disappeared across fresh powder, too deliberate to be random, too organized to be chance. None of them could prove what they saw, and yet none of them doubted it either. Because when it comes to Marty, proof isn't what keeps the story alive. Belief is. For many Alaskans, Marty became more than a man. He became a symbol of the quiet defiance that still lives in the heart of the wilderness, the unspoken truth that some people are meant to live beyond the map's edge. He was no longer the man on television, no longer the face on magazine covers. He had returned to where he truly belonged, to the land that made him who he was. Weeks after the official announcement, a team of independent filmmakers traveled north, hoping to capture the essence of the region that had swallowed and perhaps protected him. They didn't find Marty, but they found his presence everywhere. In the way trappers still spoke his name with reverence, in the cabins that still kept his survival manuals, in the children who now said they wanted to grow up and live like Marty. One of those filmmakers described something strange in his journal. On a still night near the Tanana River, as temperatures dropped to 40 below, he heard what he swore was the sound of an axe striking wood. 3 slow, deliberate hits. Then silence. He waited, but the sound never came again. When he returned to camp, he found the remains of a small fire, recent, faintly warm, and beside it, 3 perfectly laid spruce logs stacked in a way only seasoned trappers know how to leave. A sign, a signal, a message. He never said the words out loud, but the look in his eyes said everything. He believed Marty had been there, maybe hours before. Back in Fairbanks, reporters tried to press state officials for more information, but the department refused to comment further. They said the file was closed pending voluntary contact. Those words were deliberate, a bureaucratic way of saying that Marty wasn't missing anymore. He was simply living on his own terms. The following month, one final photograph emerged. It wasn't from a drone or a search team, but from a satellite. The image captured the vast whiteness north of the Brooks Range, dotted with shadows of trees. Near the bottom corner of the frame, barely visible, a thin wisp of smoke rose in a single straight line. Analysts said it was nothing unusual, perhaps a small natural vent. But those who knew better felt something deeper. The coordinates placed that smoke precisely along the route Marty once charted in his trapping journals. North, always north. The same path he had written about before vanishing. The same path he followed for decades. Soon, word spread through the small Alaskan communities again, not as a headline this time, but as a whisper carried on cold winds. He's still out there. Hunters crossing the frozen rivers began leaving small offerings near their traps. A matchstick, a strip of jerky, a folded note tucked under rock, tokens of respect for the man who had become part of the land itself. Some said the wilderness had chosen to keep him, that he'd crossed some invisible threshold between man and myth. Others said he simply found what he'd been searching for all his life: silence, freedom, purpose. But everyone agreed on one thing. Marty Meierotto hadn't been defeated by Alaska. He had become Alaska. Even television networks that once filmed his life struggled to move on. Documentaries aired, interviews replayed, tributes flooded social media. Fans across the world began lighting candles, building small fires in their backyards on cold nights as a sign of respect. A flame for Marty, they called it. Each one symbolized the belief that somewhere out there, beneath the same night sky, his own fire still burned. And maybe it does. In the months following the confirmation, pilots flying supply routes reported seeing strange light signals flashing from distant valleys. 3 short bursts, then a long one, repeated at irregular intervals. The pattern didn't match any distress call. When translated using Morse code, it read a single word: free. Coincidence or not, that word echoed everything Marty stood for. The man who had once faced storms that erased whole landscapes now existed beyond every label, every limitation. He wasn't lost. He was liberated. Even his family seemed to accept that truth. Dominique and their daughter, Noah, kept his old cabin in 2 Rivers, exactly as he left it. Tools still hung neatly on the wall. His old snowshoes leaned by the door. The wood stove was still polished, as though he might return any day. But when reporters asked if they still expected to see him again, Dominique simply smiled and said, "He never left. He's just where he belongs." As winter tightened its grip over Alaska again, state patrols flew one last mission over the northern region. They reported seeing faint animal tracks, maybe caribou, maybe something else. Then, moments before the aircraft turned back, the pilots spotted movement, a single figure at the edge of a frozen ridge. The man appeared to be cutting firewood, his posture strong, deliberate. The pilot circled once, but by the time he returned, the figure was gone. All that remained was smoke curling from a fire pit. The coordinates matched, once again, the same region north of the Brooks Range. That sighting never made the official record, but among those who know, it was enough. Enough to believe that Marty had done the impossible, not just surviving years beyond his disappearance, but thriving, living his own legend. In the quiet hours of an Alaskan dawn, when the sky glows blue and silver, it's said that if you listen closely, you can hear the faint creak of wood on snow, the slow rhythm of a sled dragging across frozen ground. They say that's Marty, still moving north, chasing the horizon that never ends. For many, his story is no longer a mystery to be solved. It's a story to be honored. Because in a world that grows smaller every day, Marty Meierotto remains proof that some parts of the earth and some parts of the human spirit can never be fully mapped. Somewhere beyond the last tree line, a fire burns in a small handmade stove. A kettle whistles. The smell of spruce smoke rises into the frozen night. A man sits beside that fire, his breath mixing with the wind, his eyes fixed on the northern lights above. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. The land understands him, and he understands it. In that silence, he is not alone. He is part of something eternal, something older than names, older than fear, older than time itself. And as the aurora dances overhead, painting the snow in green and gold, the world that once watched him from afar finally understands. Marty Meierotto didn't vanish. He ascended into legend, into wilderness, into freedom. And somewhere, in the far north, the spirit of Alaska walked